Commander Elysia stood at the command bridge of the Eternal Dawn, the gleaming flagship of Earth's Federation. Her eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the array of holoscreens before her. The space beyond the viewports was an abyss, silent and cold, save for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Yet within her, a storm raged. She hadn't expected this. A personal summons to the High Council was rare, usually a cold, impersonal message sent through secure channels. But this time, the request was for her, and her alone. The Federation had been preparing for this moment for decades, but no one had ever anticipated it would fall to someone like her, a soldier, to act as humanity's emissary. Her fingers brushed against the cold surface of the tablet in her hand. The familiar insignia of the Villox emblazoned the screen. Their demands were always the same: a new chosen, a new Tithe. The ancient alien race's influence had long since dominated Earth's politics. With each passing century, their grip had only tightened. Humanity's immortality, kept alive by the Villox, had come at the price of periodic sacrifices. The chosen were selected, often at random, and offered up in ritual. The trade had always seemed like a fair exchange until now. Elysia's thoughts drifted to her younger brother, Kalen, a brilliant scientist with a future stretching far beyond anything she could imagine. The last time she saw him, they had shared a quiet dinner. Now, she couldn't shake the image of his face as she stood at the edge of an uncertain fate. The bridge was unusually quiet, save for the soft clicking of keyboards and murmured conversations between officers. Her second-in-command, Captain Bryn, approached her. His face was grim, his posture stiff. "Commander, we've received their final confirmation," he said, voice barely audible. "The Villox demand a representative. Their terms are non-negotiable." Elysia felt her throat tighten. The Federation had expected this demand, but it had always been framed as a distant problem. Humanity's Tithe had been a ritual, an uncomfortable truth long buried beneath centuries of diplomacy and bargaining. Now it was inescapable. "What happens if we refuse?" she asked, her tone more detached than she felt. She already knew the answer. She had seen the data. Bryn hesitated before responding. "Earth's immortality will be revoked. Billions will die, Commander. Every person alive today will age and perish within days. Their lifespans shrunk to their natural limits. No cure, no treatment, just death." Elysia clenched her fists. "And the chosen. Each one will be taken by the Villox. They will be their tribute. Those who are chosen will serve the Villox until they're no longer useful. And when their bodies wither, their souls will be consumed to fuel the Villox's endless existence." A cold shiver ran down Elysia's spine. She had known the cost of immortality, but hearing it spoken aloud brought the weight of the truth crashing down on her. The holotable in front of her blinked to life with a new transmission, this time from the Villox High Council. The alien figures on the screen were cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing with a sickly green hue. Their faces were inscrutable, their alien presence suffocating. A voice, calm and predatory, filled the room. "We await your response, Commander. We expect you to arrive promptly. The time of the next Tithe is drawing near." Elysia met the eyes of the Villox leader, her resolve hardening. "I'll be there." As the transmission ended, Bryn's gaze was full of unspoken questions. Elysia gave a single curt nod. She knew what this meant. She had no choice. The Federation needed her to do what they could not: negotiate, bargain, or, if necessary, fight. Her duty was to ensure humanity's survival, no matter the cost. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the real cost might be something far greater than anyone could imagine. This continuation sets up the tension between Elysia's duty and the grim reality of the situation. The stakes are high, and the conflict between self-preservation and the moral consequences of the Villox's pact has already begun to brew. The vast expanse of Salthor loomed before Elysia, as the eternal dawn descended through its thick, oppressive atmosphere. The planet's surface was a swirling mass of dark clouds and lightning storms, casting the entire landscape in an eerie, unending twilight. From the moment her feet touched the surface, she felt as though she had stepped into a world entirely alien, where the very air seemed to press in on her chest. The Villox Citadel was an imposing structure, carved from obsidian-like stone that reflected no light, its jagged peaks piercing the sky. The architecture was utterly foreign, a grotesque blend of sleek, angular shapes and organic forms that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. As Alicia and her entourage were escorted through the Citadel's vast, silent halls, the air grew colder, and the silence was thick enough to taste. Her guide, a tall, faceless Velox envoy, led them without speaking, the strange alien robes he wore flowing like dark liquid. Every step echoed in the otherwise still environment, and Alicia could feel eyes watching her from the shadows. Velox soldiers, their reptilian eyes glowing faintly, their posture rigid and intimidating. Soon, they reached a large, circular chamber at the heart of the citadel. At its center was a throne, not of any material she recognized, but something alive, an ever-shifting mass of tendrils and crystalline structures. There, perched like a queen on a throne of darkness, was Queen Ilzira. She was a creature of towering beauty and unimaginable horror. Her elongated limbs and skeletal features were framed by a crown of pulsing, bioluminescent veins that coiled around her head like a living crown. Her eyes glowed an unsettling shade of violet, piercing and unreadable. Alicia stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the Velox in images, but nothing could prepare her for standing face to face with one of the oldest and most dangerous species in the galaxy. The alien monarch studied her for a long moment before speaking, her voice resonating in Alicia's mind as much as in the air. "Welcome, Commander Alicia," Queen Ilzira said, her voice a smooth blend of authority and something darker. "I trust your journey was enlightening?" Alicia stood tall, resisting the urge to flinch under the queen's gaze. "I understand your terms. You demand a new chosen, a Tithe, to ensure humanity's continued immortality." Ilzira's lips curled into something close to a smile, though it held no warmth. "It is a simple transaction. We grant you life beyond the natural order, and in return, we take what we are owed. A fair exchange, is it not?" Alicia's eyes narrowed, but she kept her voice steady. "You've demanded Tithe for centuries. Why now? Why push humanity to the edge with such haste?" The Velox queen leaned forward, her gaze narrowing as she studied Alicia with renewed interest. "Time is an elusive thing, Commander. It is true, we have long been patient with your kind. But there are complications. Our resources grow thin. The cost of maintaining your immortality, your endless existence, requires more than mere tribute. The energy you provide us with sustains our civilization. We must have it, or both your people and ours will crumble." Alicia's stomach churned as she fought to control her anger. "Are you telling me you're running out of humans to harvest?" Queen Ilzira's expression remained neutral, though her eyes glinted with something that could almost be mistaken for amusement. "Not just any humans. We need the chosen, those rare few whose immortality remains untainted by the passage of time. Their essence is more potent. You should understand the necessity of sacrifice." Alicia swallowed hard, a knot tightening in her chest. She had heard rumors, whispers of the Velox's true nature, of their need to consume more than just human blood or flesh. But hearing it from Ilzira herself made it all too real. The Velox were feeding off humanity, not just sustaining their immortality, but strengthening their own life force. They had built their empire on the backs of the chosen, their sacrifices keeping the Velox alive. "You've enslaved us for centuries," Alicia said, her voice cold. "And now you demand more. Why don't you simply let us go? Let humanity stand on its own." The queen's smile twisted into something darker. You are in no position to negotiate, Commander. Humanity exists because of us. You live forever because of us. You've forgotten your place. Alicia's hands balled into fists at her sides, her mind racing. The truth was clear now. Humanity was no longer an ally to the Velox, but a resource, a means of survival. And the Velox had no intention of letting go of their grip on Earth, no matter the cost. As the Velox Queen leaned back in her throne, a thought sparked in Alicia's mind. There has to be another way. But what? How could she fight an empire that had enslaved humanity's very existence? Alicia took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. This continuation builds on the mounting tension between Alicia and the Velox, revealing more of their parasitic nature and heightening the stakes. It sets the stage for Alicia's growing determination to find a way out of the Velox's deadly hold. Alicia's mind churned long after the meeting with Queen Elzira had ended. The walls of the Velox citadel seemed to close in on her, and the weight of their demands pressed down like a suffocating fog. She had known the Tithe was brutal, but she hadn't understood just how much humanity's immortality had cost. The Queen's words echoed in her mind. We need the Chosen. Their essence is more potent. The truth was more horrifying than Alicia had imagined. The Velox weren't simply keeping humanity alive. They were feeding off the essence of the Chosen, growing stronger with every sacrifice. But what had they been doing with all that power? The Velox had never shown a hint of weakness before, and yet now they seemed desperate. Why? As the day stretched on, Alicia was led through a labyrinth of corridors deep within the citadel, where Velox scientists worked tirelessly in massive, sterile labs. It was a place she wasn't supposed to see, but a slip-up in security allowed her a brief glimpse into what lay beyond the public spaces. The sheer scale of what she witnessed made her stomach turn. In one chamber, rows of suspended human figures floated in tanks filled with a dark, viscous fluid. Their bodies appeared untouched by age, but their faces were gaunt, their eyes vacant. They were the Chosen, selected for their immortality, kept alive in a twisted form of stasis. Alicia realized with a sickening lurch in her gut that they weren't just kept alive for tribute. They were being harvested. Their essence was drained, consumed to fuel the Velox's own life force, their vitality siphoned away to empower the alien race. The soft clicking noise behind her made Alicia snap back to reality. She spun around to find one of the Velox scientists standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't be here, Commander, the Velox said in a low mechanical voice. His thin, elongated features were framed by the pale, greenish glow of the lab's artificial lights. But now that you've seen, perhaps you understand the true nature of the pact. Alicia's heart raced, and her hand instinctively went to the hidden weapon at her side. What are you doing to them? The Velox scientist's lipless mouth curled into a thin smile. We are doing what is necessary. Their essence feeds our empire, keeps us from decay. Without them, we would fall into oblivion. We have given your species immortality, and in return, we take what we need to survive. It is a fair exchange. Fair? Alicia spat. You've enslaved humanity for centuries, kept us in the dark about the truth. You've used us as cattle. The scientist didn't flinch. We have done what was required to maintain order. Without the Tithe, both your species and ours would wither. You should be grateful. Alicia's fists clenched. The sheer arrogance in the scientist's tone made her blood boil. Grateful? The Velox saw themselves as benevolent gods and humanity as nothing more than a resource. A sudden thought struck her. The Velox had mentioned their weakening resources. Perhaps their empire wasn't as stable as they made it seem. There had to be something more to this. Why would they go to such lengths to maintain a system of tithe and subjugation? What were they hiding? She needed answers, and she needed them fast. I'll take your word for it, then, Alicia said, turning on her heel. But I'll be watching, and I won't forget this. The Villox scientist remained silent as she walked away, but something in his eyes made her pause. Was there more to this? Were the Villox truly as powerful as they claimed, or were they on the verge of collapse? The thought gnawed at her. Later that night, as she lay in her quarters, Alizia stared at the ceiling, restless. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The Villox were hiding something far worse than she could imagine, and she had to find out what it was. Her thoughts turned to the Resistance, the humans who had fled the Villox's control and lived in the shadows. If there was any hope for breaking the Tithe, they would be the key. But she had to act quickly. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Time was running out. Tomorrow, she would make contact with the rebels hidden within the Citadel, those few brave enough to resist the Villox. It was time to put her plan into motion. She just hoped she wasn't too late. This continuation intensifies the mystery and danger surrounding the Villox's true nature and their hold over humanity. Alizia is beginning to piece together the larger picture. There's more at stake than simply ending the Tithe, and her next steps could be the key to uncovering the Villox's hidden agenda. Alizia sat in the dimly lit chamber, her fingers tracing the edges of the encrypted data pad in front of her. The room around her was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the Citadel's power grid. Her mind raced as she reviewed the cryptic information she had managed to gather about the Villox. There was something deeply unsettling about their growing desperation, a desperation that hinted at a deeper instability within their empire. She had come to Salthor with one purpose: to secure humanity's survival. But the more she uncovered, the more it seemed like the Villox were not just hunting for power. They were scrambling to hold on to something they were losing. The immortality they fed off, the essence of humanity, wasn't just a means of survival, it was their lifeline. Alizia's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock on the door. She straightened instinctively, her military training kicking in. Enter. The door slid open, revealing a woman in shadow, her features obscured by a cloak. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Commander Alizia, you've been asking the right questions." Alizia's pulse quickened. This wasn't a Villox agent, at least she didn't think so. Her instincts told her this was someone who wasn't supposed to be here, someone who didn't belong in the Citadel. She narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" The woman stepped into the light, revealing a face marked with a faint, jagged scar across her cheek, a reminder of the cost of defying the Villox. "I'm a member of the Resistance. And you're not the first human to come to Salthor asking questions, but you're the first one to get this far." Alizia stood, her mind reeling. The Resistance? Here on Salthor? The woman nodded, lowering her hood to reveal sharp, calculating eyes. "We've been here for years, hiding in plain sight, gathering intel, waiting for someone like you. Someone who might be able to do what we couldn't. The truth is, Commander, you've been living a lie." Alizia's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The Villox aren't just draining your people to stay immortal," the woman said, her voice dropping even lower. "They're feeding off the very souls of the Chosen. The energy isn't just biological, it's metaphysical. We've discovered that the Villox are using the Chosen to power a device, something far darker than you've been led to believe. It's not about survival, it's about maintaining an unnatural existence. And their empire is crumbling because they're running out of the very essence they rely on." Alicia's mind raced as the weight of the revelations sank in. The Villox were in crisis, desperately holding on to something they no longer had control over. Their immortality was a facade, sustained by the essence they harvested from humans, and they were now unable to replenish it. The whole empire was built on a crumbling foundation. "Why now?" Alizia asked, her voice tight. "Why push for a new Chosen if they're already in decline?" The Resistance leader hesitated. "The Tithe is not just about survival. The Villox are desperate to create something more, something beyond what their current form allows. They believe that by consuming enough of the Chosen's essence, they can evolve into a higher state of being, a perfect, eternal form. But in doing so, they risk destroying the very thing that keeps them alive, and if they succeed, they will become unstoppable. Alicia's stomach churned at the thought of what they were trying to achieve, an entire species of godlike beings, built on the suffering of humanity. But the Resistance's information gave her a glimmer of hope. If the Vilocs were so desperate, if they were on the verge of self-destruction, then perhaps there was a way to use that to their advantage. "I need to contact the leadership of the Resistance," Alicia said, her voice steady with purpose. "If we're going to fight back, we need to expose this truth to humanity, but we can't do it alone." The Resistance leader smiled, a look of approval crossing her face. "That's exactly why I came to you, Commander. You're the catalyst we've been waiting for. We've managed to infiltrate several Vilocs-controlled systems, but we need someone from the inside, someone they won't suspect." Alicia's eyes darkened with resolve. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, but now she understood the true cost of their immortality. The Vilocs weren't just trying to keep humanity alive, they were trying to control the very essence of life itself. It was time to strike back, and this time, humanity would not just survive. They would break the chains the Vilocs had wrapped around them for centuries. This continuation deepens the mystery and gives Alicia a clearer understanding of the Vilocs' true goals, while also introducing the rebellion's role and laying the groundwork for the next phase of her plan. The stakes have escalated, and Alicia now knows that the fight will be more complicated than she had imagined. Alicia couldn't shake the weight of the Resistance leader's words. The Vilocs weren't merely parasites feeding off humanity, they were pushing towards something even darker, a higher existence powered by the very essence of her people. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the stakes were beyond even her worst fears. The entire survival of humanity rested on a razor's edge, and the Vilocs were no longer content with just keeping humanity alive. They wanted to transcend, to evolve into something godlike, and at the cost of everything humanity had built. It wasn't just immortality on the line now, it was the very essence of what it meant to be human. Alicia paced back and forth in the dimly lit war room, the walls covered with holographic maps of the Viloc citadel, their military installations, and key facilities. The Resistance had managed to infiltrate many of these systems, but they needed a catalyst, a plan that would expose the Vilocs' true motives and disrupt their experiments. Alicia's role was clear. She would be the linchpin, the bridge between the Resistance's scattered cells and the Federation's military forces, but it was a dangerous gamble. Trusting the Resistance, especially on Vilocs-controlled soil, was risky, and one misstep could bring everything crashing down. The Resistance leader, who introduced herself as Kala, sat across the table from Alicia, her face etched with resolve. "The next step is crucial," Kala said, her voice low but firm. "We know where they're conducting the most important experiments, where they're trying to weaponize the essence they harvest. But the facility is highly guarded. If we strike now, we risk not only alerting the Vilocs, but also losing what's left of your people." Alicia leaned forward, her mind racing. "We need to disrupt their experiment, but we can't do it alone. I'll need to coordinate with the Federation. The moment we strike, they'll know it's us. We can't give them any reason to retaliate against Earth." Kala's sharp gaze met Alicia's. "You think they won't retaliate? They will. But if we can expose their true agenda, if we can prove they're not just draining humans for immortality, but trying to evolve into something else entirely, the Federation will have no choice but to take action." Alicia's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. If they believe humanity has been complicit in this, it could turn the entire galaxy against us. "That's why we need your credibility," Kala replied. "We need someone on the inside to help us deliver the final blow, someone they trust." Alicia's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what Kala was implying. "You want me to betray them." Kala's expression softened. though there was no hesitation in her voice. "Not betray them, Commander. You've already seen what they're doing. This isn't just about saving humanity, it's about stopping the Velox from becoming something far worse. Something that could threaten the entire galaxy." The weight of her decision hit Elysia like a physical blow. She had been raised to trust the Federation, to believe in its mission of peace and unity. But now, after everything she had seen, she could no longer ignore the truth. The Velox were not merely a threat to humanity, they were a threat to the entire galaxy, and their hunger for power would never be sated until they had consumed everything in their path. She was stuck between two worlds, the loyalty she had sworn to the Federation, and the undeniable need to protect her people from a force that had already enslaved them for centuries. Her role in this rebellion was not just to expose the Velox, but to lead the charge against them, to take back humanity's future. "I'll do it," Alyssa said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time the Velox have to prepare. We strike before they can solidify their power." Calla nodded, a rare flicker of approval crossing her face. "We already have a plan in place. We just need you to get us access to their central archives, the heart of their operations. From there, we'll plant the evidence that proves they're trying to ascend to a higher plane of existence. If we can take that down, the Federation will be forced to act." Alicia's mind sharpened. This was it, the point of no return. The Velox had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity. She would not let them destroy everything her people had fought for. "Then let's begin," Alyssa said. "We move tonight." As she left the war room, the weight of her decision settled over her. She had crossed a line, one that would change everything. There was no going back. But in the cold silence of the Citadel, with the full scope of the Velox ambitions looming over her, Elysia felt a spark of hope ignite deep within her. If they could take down the Velox, humanity would rise from the ashes of its captivity, not as slaves, but as masters of its own destiny. And the first step began now. This continuation dives deeper into the Resistance's plans and Elysia's growing commitment to their cause. She's made a difficult choice to ally with the rebels, setting the stage for a risky operation to expose the Velox's true intentions. The stakes are higher than ever, and Elysia is prepared to risk everything for the survival of her people. The night felt heavy as Elysia moved through the shadowed halls of the Velox Citadel, her heart pounding in her chest. The plan had begun. Every step she took felt like a breath drawn deep before plunging into a vast, dark unknown. With Calla and a small team of resistance fighters at her side, they had infiltrated a lesser-guarded section of the Citadel, avoiding detection by the Velox's security systems. But they were now headed to the most dangerous place in the entire structure, the Central Archives. Elysia had been in and out of Velox installations before, but nothing had ever prepared her for the sense of suffocating dread that filled the air now. The Citadel, a labyrinth of corridors and towering chambers, seemed to shift and pulse around her, as though the building itself was alive. The Velox had designed it this way, to intimidate, to confuse, to create an atmosphere that would break even the most determined intruder. They passed through several checkpoints, using forged identification codes, the faintest glimmer of resistance tactics embedded in their every move. The further they went, the deeper into the heart of the Velox Empire they ventured. At last, they stood before the massive doors of the Central Archives, an imposing, angular structure made of living metal that seemed to absorb all light. The archives were the nerve center of the entire Velox operations, containing the genetic and metaphysical research that was driving their plans for ascension. To breach it was to directly challenge the Velox's most prized secret. "Once we're in, we only have minutes before they realize something's wrong," Calla said, her voice low but steady. "We plant the evidence, extract the data, and get out. No detours." Elysia nodded, her gaze fixed on the dark, shifting doorway. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her. Inside those walls lay the truth. Proof of the Velox's terrible ambitions, proof that they weren't just consuming humans to survive. They were hunting for a way to ascend beyond the limitations of their physical forms. Humanity was not just fuel to them. It was the key to unlocking their godlike evolution. With a sharp hiss, the door slid open, and the team moved inside. The room beyond was a vast, hollow chamber, its walls lined with pulsating alien consoles and holographic displays. In the center stood a massive crystalline structure, humming with energy. It was the heart of the Velox's research, a gateway to their darkest ambitions. At the base of the structure, a glowing orb pulsed with eerie light, the device they had been building, powered by the harvested essence of humanity. It was more than just a tool. It was an engine of evolution, a machine that could transform the Velox into beings of unimaginable power. "Start planting the evidence," Alicia ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos of her thoughts. The Resistance members spread out, swiftly planting data disks and triggering hidden subroutines in the archive systems to upload the truth of the Velox's intentions. They worked quickly, moving with the practiced efficiency of those who knew the consequences of failure. But just as Alicia turned to make sure everything was going according to plan, a voice broke through the stillness. Well, what have we here?" Alicia froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall Velox officer draped in ceremonial robes, his eyes glowing a predatory violet. His presence was as commanding as his posture. He knew who she was. "You should not have come here, Commander," the Velox officer said, his voice silky and calm, almost with a tinge of amusement. "The archives are not a place for human foot soldiers." Alicia's pulse quickened. There was no time for a confrontation. Her instincts screamed at her to act. "Calla now," Alicia shouted, her voice filled with urgency. At once, the Resistance fighters activated the final stage of their plan, an EMP pulse designed to disable the Citadel's security systems long enough to make their escape. The officer's eyes widened in surprise as the lights flickered, and the familiar hum of the Citadel's power grid faltered. But instead of panic, the Velox officer's expression twisted into something far more sinister. "You think this will stop us?" he said, his lips curling into a cold smile. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before Alicia could react, the officer raised his hand, and a surge of dark energy shot from his palm, striking the data array with a sharp crack. Sparks flew, and the room was suddenly flooded with a blinding violet light. Alicia was thrown backward, crashing against the crystalline structure. The Resistance members, too, were knocked off their feet, and the archive systems began to fail, the holographic displays flashing erratically. In the chaos, Alicia's mind raced. This officer wasn't just a guard. He was something more. He wasn't acting alone. As she struggled to her feet, a horrible realization set in. The Velox had anticipated this. They had known someone would come for the truth, and they had been waiting. The battle for humanity's future was no longer just about the Tithe. It was a fight for survival against an enemy who had far more power than they had imagined. The Velox weren't just parasites. They were predators, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secret from escaping. In this continuation, the plot thickens as Alicia and the Resistance infiltrate the Velox's central archives, but they quickly discover the Velox were prepared for their intrusion. The action heightens, and the stakes grow more intense as they uncover that the Velox's plans are far more dangerous than expected, with a greater level of control and power at play. Alicia's sense of urgency and the constant threat of failure adds tension to their mission. Alicia's head throbbed from the impact against the crystalline structure, but the pain was secondary to the cold terror that shot through her. The Velox officer's violet energy had torn through the archives with terrifying force, disabling the EMP pulse and sending the Resistance team into chaos. Sparks danced in the air, and the once stable hum of the Citadel's energy grid had given way to a harsh, erratic static. The room was dark, save for the flickering glow of the damaged systems, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. Elysia fought to regain her footing, pushing herself up from the jagged floor. She had to act, and fast. The Velox officer was no mere guard. He was a high-ranking member of their elite force, possibly one of the very architects of their Dark Ascension plans. His power wasn't just physical. It was drawn from the very essence the Velox had been harvesting from humanity. He could control more than just energy. He could manipulate the flow of life itself. "Everyone, regroup," Elysia shouted, her voice cutting through the din. The resistance members were already struggling to stand, their faces pale with fear. "We can't afford to be scattered. We need to get to the data core and finish what we started." Kala, ever the tactical leader, quickly assessed the situation. Her expression was grim as she nodded. "We're running out of time. The Velox know we're here now. They'll lock this place down within minutes." Elysia's eyes flashed to the glowing orb at the center of the room, the heart of the Velox's experiments. It was still pulsing, an eerie rhythm like the slow beating of a heart. If they could access the core data before the Citadel sealed itself, they could expose the Velox's plans to the Federation. It would be a gamble, but it was their only shot. With the Velox officer still standing, his dark energy swirling around him like a storm, Elysia knew they couldn't just fight their way out. He was too powerful. Instead, they needed to outsmart him. "Cover me," Elysia said, her voice determined. "I'll disable the data core. You need to get the evidence off-site, no matter what." Kala exchanged a brief glance with the rest of the team, then nodded. "Understood. We'll make a path." Elysia sprinted toward the central console, dodging stray bursts of energy as the Velox officer flung waves of raw power at her. Each attack was more controlled, more deliberate, as though he was trying to wear her down, not simply destroy her. The thought crossed her mind. This officer wasn't just trying to stop them, he was trying to test her, to see if she would break under pressure. She reached the console and immediately began the difficult process of overriding the security protocols. Her hands flew across the interface, a combination of human ingenuity and Velox tech she had learned to manipulate. But the systems were damaged, and the clock was ticking. Every second was a risk, and Elysia felt the weight of it. Behind her, Kala and the others engaged the Velox officer, drawing his attention long enough for Elysia to complete the override. The officer's energy bolts rang out like thunder, narrowly missing Kala and the others, but they held their ground. They were trained, but even they were no match for the officer's raw power. "Commander, hurry!" Kala shouted as another blast sent her reeling. Elysia's heart raced. She had to finish. One more command input, and the data core would be exposed. The truth, the evidence that the Velox were draining humanity, not just for survival, but to fuel their ascension into something far more powerful, would be their ticket to exposing the Empire's corruption to the Federation. With a final surge of focus, Elysia hit the last key. The archive systems trembled, and a low hum filled the air as the data began to download. But the console flashed red, a final alarm blaring. The override hadn't been as clean as she'd hoped. "No," she muttered under her breath. The Velox officer had caught wind of her actions, and his power intensified. He hurled a torrent of dark energy straight at her. In that instant, something inside Elysia snapped, an overwhelming surge of instinctive will to survive, to protect those she had sworn to fight for. She threw herself at the console, using her body to shield it from the energy blast. It was an act of desperation, of pure determination, but it worked. The blast connected with her, sending a shock of pain through her body, but the console held. Then, with a final burst of effort, the core was fully activated, and the encrypted data flooded the system. The evidence was now stored, and the countdown to their escape had begun. Elysia collapsed to the floor, her body screaming in agony from the blast. She barely heard Kala's voice shouting at her, but she felt the warmth of the resistance members pulling her back to her feet. "We've got what we came for, Commander," Calla said, urgency in her voice. "We need to move." Alicia nodded weakly. The pain was overwhelming, but she forced herself to her feet. The Velox officer was still standing, but he was no longer focused on them. His eyes were wide, scanning the archives as if realizing too late that his worst fear had come true. The Velox Empire was on the brink of collapse. The resistance team moved quickly, racing toward the exit. But even as they fled, Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Velox would hunt them down. They would come for the data, and they would stop at nothing to prevent the galaxy from learning the truth. In this continuation, the Resistance executes their plan under dire circumstances, and Alicia takes a bold, life-risking move to secure the data that will expose the Velox's terrifying ambitions. However, they're not out of danger yet. The true cost of their mission is becoming clear, and the battle is far from over. Alicia's vision swam as she stumbled through the darkened corridors, the echoes of their hurried footsteps pounding in her ears. The team was moving fast, but the weight of what they had just done, the evidence they had secured, pressed down on her like an anchor. The Velox officer's voice echoed in her mind, cold and mocking. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." He wasn't wrong. They were dealing with a force far beyond anything the Resistance had prepared for. The Velox didn't just want humanity's essence. They wanted to transcend the physical realm itself, to evolve into beings of unimaginable power. And they would stop at nothing to achieve that goal. "Keep moving," Calla barked, snapping Alicia back to the present. The Resistance fighters were ahead, working to clear the way. Alicia, her body battered and fatigued from the blast she had absorbed, pushed herself forward. They couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The archives were beginning to lock down, the metallic walls humming ominously as the Citadel's systems fought to seal off every exit. They had less than 10 minutes before the entire complex would go into lockdown, trapping them inside. But they weren't alone. Behind them, the soft hiss of something moving in the shadows grew louder. Alicia's heart skipped. The Velox officer wasn't the only one who had noticed the breach. The Velox forces were closing in. Every step they took brought them closer to their doom. "We'll never make it out if they cut us off," one of the Resistance members muttered, panic creeping into his voice. "We have to hold them off," Calla said, her tone hard as steel. She turned to Alicia. "We need a way out. Can you get us to the emergency shuttle bay?" Alicia nodded, even as her mind raced. The shuttle bay was their best chance of escaping the Citadel, but it was located on the opposite end of the complex. To get there, they would have to pass through the heart of the Velox Military Command Center, a place heavily guarded by sentries and defense systems. But if they didn't try, they would all be trapped. "I can get us there," Alicia said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion pulling at her body. "I know the layout of this place. Follow me." The team shifted into formation, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning every corner as they sprinted down the winding corridors. Every step felt like an eternity. Behind them, the faint hum of Velox pursuit grew louder. They were being hunted. Suddenly, the corridor ahead lit up with the harsh red glow of alarm lights. The Velox had anticipated their route. The way to the shuttle bay was blocked. "We're not going to make it through that," one of the Resistance members said, his voice tight with panic. "We don't have a choice," Alicia said, pulling them back into motion. "The shuttle bay is our only way out." As they approached the blockade, Alicia's mind whirled. She was thinking faster now, calculating their chances. There was a service tunnel that connected directly to the shuttle bay. It wasn't ideal, narrow, hidden, and far from secure, but it was their best shot. "I know a shortcut," Alicia said, gesturing for the team to follow. "Stay close." They turned down a narrower corridor, the walls tight around them, and entered a maintenance hatch. The moment the door shut behind them, the sound of pursuing Velox forces pounding down the hallway faded. They were momentarily safe, but only for a moment. As they made their way through the dark tunnels, the gravity of their situation hit Alicia once more. The data they had stolen, the evidence of the Velox's terrifying experiments, could expose them to the galaxy. It was more than a simple betrayal. It was a declaration of war against the Velox Empire. The Federation would have no choice but to intervene, but it would come at a price. "I've been thinking," Calla said, her voice soft but steady. "This mission, what we've done, it's bigger than any of us. The Federation may act, but if they do, the Velox will come for us all. For humanity." Alicia glanced at Calla, the weight of her words sinking in. The Federation was their hope, but the Velox were no longer just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to the entire galaxy, and their plans reached far beyond just one species. If they succeeded, there would be nothing to stop their ascension. "We'll make them understand," Alicia said, her voice resolute. "Humanity will show them what it means to be free." They reached the shuttle bay just as the final countdown to lockdown began. The shuttle bay doors opened with a hiss, revealing the sleek, silver ship that would carry them to safety. The team rushed inside, weapons trained on the doorway as they secured the craft. As Alicia climbed into the cockpit, her hand hovered over the controls. The shuttle doors slammed shut, and the engines hummed to life. The countdown continued, seconds to spare. "Prepare for launch," Alicia called out. She didn't have time to think about what came next. She only knew one thing: humanity was no longer just a pawn in the Velox's game. They had fought back. They had fought for their freedom. And now they had the evidence to make sure the galaxy would know the truth. As the shuttle tore away from the Velox citadel, Alicia's heart pounded. The price of immortality had been paid. The future of humanity rested on the edge of a knife, and they were ready to fight for it. In this final part, the Resistance narrowly escapes the Velox citadel, with Alicia leading her team through dangerous corridors and toward their only means of escape. The tension builds to a breaking point, and as they flee, the true cost of their mission becomes clear. Exposing the Velox's plans will spark a galaxy-wide conflict, but it is a fight they can no longer avoid. The story ends with humanity's survival hanging in the balance, and the weight of their resistance now more critical than ever.